Claressa Shields is not the greatest of all time women fighters. I'm going to explain why Christy Martin and Holly Holm outshine Claressa Shields in terms of what they can do in the ring, or in Holly's case, the ring and the cage, and in terms of their contribution to combat sports. So Christy Martin is by far maybe the most important female fighter in terms of putting women's professional combat sport on the map in this, shall we call it, the modern era, from the 1990s onward. Christy Martin is the reason that the general population, who didn't necessarily follow boxing, became aware of women fighting. And Christy Martin legitimized women fighters, I think, for the general populace. Christy Martin brought female fighters into our collective consciousness back in the late 90s through the early 2000s. Christy Martin was a household name at that time. She was the Ronda Rousey of her era. I think everybody now knows who Ronda Rousey is and understands that women's MMA is a legit pursuit for aspiring female combat athletes. That's really thanks to Ronda and the UFC. So back in Christy Martin's time, there was, of course, there's no social media, there's only media. So it's much more difficult to get your image or videos of your fights out there in the realm for people to see at their own will. Female fighters, our fights were not going to be seen unless they were captured by professional media outlets. So I was super fortunate in that almost every single one of my fights was captured on proper video, professional film production, because my fights were televised on what was once existent called cable TV. So that's why I'm able to have some of those fights uploaded here to the YouTube, because they were shot professionally. I was given, of course, a VHS tape of those fights, and then I just transferred it over so I could upload it to YouTube. But my point being, they weren't shot from someone's phone at the time. They were shot by professionals, and so that's why the quality's decent. So my point being that in Christy Martin's era, she had to breach that that wall of being accepted by mainstream sports media in order to become a household name. And that's like almost asking someone to do the impossible, right? Because as a female athlete and as a female combat athlete, we were not readily sort of accepted by mainstream. We were still on the fringe at that time. So for her to make that type of progress and get, mainstream media coverage, that's super awesome. It's quite the accomplishment. Now let's look at what she actually accomplished in the ring. She had a record of 49-7-3. That's considerably more fights than what Claressa has accomplished at the moment. I don't think it's fair to compare belts and how many belts Claressa has versus how many Christy had, simply because certain belts were not available to women at that time. Now, I'll make a bold statement here, which I feel like Christy Martin's what she was able to do in the ring is what Claressa Shields aspires to be like, because Christy had a very hard-hitting style, similar to Claressa. She didn't stay on the outside. She had to try to come on the inside, and I think because often she was the shorter fighter, she would work the body and work the head, but with very, very powerful punches. And I feel that Claressa is trying to be a power puncher as well. If you take a look at some of Christy's fights, she also had very nice defense and was able to roll under, bob and weave under a series of punches and come right back with counter punches. She was also able to show a little bit of dipping and slipping momentarily. Like, that wasn't her predominant style, like a Pernell Whitaker type thing, but she had that in her to be able to do that. Now the other thing is that I think she had a higher knockout ratio, right? 'Cause she had 49 wins, 32 by knockout, and by knockout, hers were due to one punch type knockouts. They weren't like barrage of a flurry of punches and then the ref just waves it off due to the series of punches. Christy landed hard one punch KO type stoppages. So I mean, check out her fights. They're high quality. It's high quality boxing. The other thing I wanted to add about Christy is that I have to give her props for stepping up to take the sort of mega fight for women at the time was for her to fight Lyla Ali. Now Lyla fought at 160 pounds, and Christy Martin fought anywhere from like 140, so junior welter to welter, junior middle, so she was anywhere from 140 to 150. There's no way she gained 10 pounds of muscle to fight Lyla Ali. I don't know how she made weight. Maybe she put rocks or coins in her pocket to step on the scale, but there's that's just a huge size difference, right? It's really almost 20 pounds of quality, your quality fight weight that she's giving away to Lyla Ali. She was certainly giving away the height as well. So Lyla wound up stopping Christy in the 5th round, but it's a fight worth watching because I think, in a sense, I have to give more kudos to Christy for that fight than I do to Lyla, only because Lyla, in my opinion, should have tried to keep Christy at the end of her jab, and Lyla did have a very good jab, straight right hand, but she chose to come in closer, and the quality of her punching, she got away with it just because of her size. She didn't throw the straight right hand from the outside. She just kind of crowded Christy and just kind of brawled a bit with her to get the stoppage, and Christy certainly showed more variety of technique in that fight, even though she was on the losing end of that. So to comment on Lyla Ali, now she's a complete anomaly, right? Because before she even starts, she's the daughter of the legendary Muhammad Ali. So immediately, if she says boxing, there'll be a whole mechanism of individuals or right underneath her or right beside her saying, okay, you want to box, we're here, like advertising, marketing, PR, sponsorships, etc. So it's not very often that somebody is sort of born into that position, but Lyla just happened to be, and we have to give her props for actually stepping in there and doing it. But for her 14-0 record, I mean, that's nice. She was undefeated, but no matter what, she was always going to be the A++ side, not even just the A side. She could fight anybody, and she would be getting the sponsorship, the support, and certainly the politics were in her favor for her fights. So I don't really consider her part of the conversation of greatest of all time, but she was in the mix with this era because she did step in there with Christy Martin, and she also, I believe, I'm not sure on this. No, Holly Holm also stepped in there with Christy Martin. So there's this sort of intermingling, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about Holly Holm. So she was a multiple-time world boxing champion. But again, because of the belts that were available at the time, I don't really consider the belts like the key. what I'm looking at is more what could you do in the ring, and what technically were you capable of. So Holly was 33-2-3 with 9 KOs, so a lower KO percentage, but obviously she did enough. She's a classic boxer. Now the important thing to know about Holly is she also crossed over from, she initially started as a kickboxer and decided to make her way into boxing, and then built herself up as a boxer, and then of course, as we know, she then switched to MMA and had the spectacular head kick knockout of Ronda Rousey as the underdog in that, as a huge underdog in that fight in Australia. So I think she was then catapulted into sort of mainstream consciousness from that one kick. But she does have a very lengthy ring resume leading up to that point. So the one sort of critique of Holly's boxing career that I can make is that the vast majority of her fights were in her backyard of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, on the other hand, it's hard to critique that because she was signed to promoter Lenny Fresquez, who's based out of New Mexico. So it's kind of a no-brainer. If your promoter is able to always have you only fight in your backyard, and he can pull in other world champions to fight you for these belts in your backyard, then kudos to your promoter. And why should you travel to the other person's backyard if you want hometown advantage? It's a double-edged sword, because on one hand it's a bit of a criticism because, you know, she didn't step outside her backyard as much as she could have. But on the other hand, if any of us were in that position, we'd probably always want home ring advantage, right? So I mean, she and her promoter were even able to pull Christy Martin into Albuquerque, New Mexico to fight, and Holly did get the decision versus Christy. But you know, that shows me that for her to be able to insist that Christy Martin come to her backyard, that her promotion had some major pull. It couldn't be just money, I don't think. So I don't really know what went on behind the scenes to be able to make all of that happen, but it's quite a machine if you can insist that, for example, I believe it was a French world champion, Lemaire, that came to Holly's backyard, amongst others. Also, I believe Anne-Marie Saccarato from New York went there twice to fight Holly. So, and I do know that there was, also Brenda Laracuente, I believe, fought her. Well, she fought her in California. So that's one time where Holly did step outside New Mexico. But I do remember talking to Melissa Hernandez, who is also a pro fighter in Gleason's Gym, New York, and she said, "Yeah, I'll fight her," but we said we're not going to fight her in New Mexico, and so, you know, the fight just never happened. Now, I don't know the behind-the-scenes conversations, but that was sort of the one thing that was kind of known about Holly at the time, was that, you know, there were women that were willing to fight her, but they wanted to fight her outside of New Mexico because they just felt they would not get the decision. So now, let's, in general, just remember that at that era, and still going now, women's bouts are 2 minutes. So it's much more challenging to get a stoppage win when you fight for 2 minutes and then both individuals have 60 seconds off. So your fight to rest ratio is 2-1, whereas for men it's 3-1. Now, I'm not going to advocate that we make this the rest time shorter. Like, if it was going to be 3-1, I have to be 45 seconds, right? I'm not asking for that, because in all honesty, it takes your corner a few seconds to get in the ring and rinse your mouthpiece, and then it takes them a few seconds to get out. So really, you don't even have that full 60 seconds. But my point being that when you have a two-minute fight versus 1 minute rest ratio, if you can get your opponent in trouble, it's gonna happen probably at about the 1:30 mark. Like, after the first minute, okay, maybe, you're able to land a couple hard body shots, and then they just have to last the next 30 seconds, and then the bell's gonna ring. Whereas if you're able to get your opponent in trouble at the 1 minute and 30 seconds round of a 3-minute round, then they still have to eke out another minute and 30 seconds. So there's kind of more opportunity for you to just get to the stoppage by the end of that round, or have them in deep trouble by the end of the round, so that they're not able to fully recover during that 60-second break. My point is that it's far more, that's why it's far more common for you to just see a lot of decision wins for women than the KOs. So we really have to give props to female fighters like Lucia Riker, like Ann Wolfe, like Christy Martin, who were able to get these stoppages and one-punch stoppages within that 2-minute time frame. That's not easy. It's hard for me to communicate any further than other than, hey, if you actually spar, try it. Like, just see the difference between a 2-minute and a 3-minute and a 5-minute round. There's a difference in terms of how one has to pace oneself, and then certainly you've got to condition your body to recover within that 60 seconds, because even for a 5-minute MMA round, you still only have 60 seconds to recoup before you gotta resume the next onslaught for another 5 minutes. Here we go. And we're going to do that at least 3 times in a row, and then maybe take a longer break, or maybe not. Depends on who's running your sparring session. But bottom line is, I would certainly put Christy Martin ahead of Claressa, because I feel like Christy Martin is the fighter that Claressa is aspiring to be, in terms of maybe getting a few more KO, improving her KO ratio. And then by far, Holly Holm exceeds Claressa in terms of like the ring and cage accomplishments. Because you recall that Claressa at one point, I don't know if she's still thinking she's going to do MMA, but she was talking a fair amount of smack about what she was going to do in the cage, and all I need to do is this, and look, I'm training with John Jones, and all I need, every striker thinks they only need to learn 5 submissions in jiu-jitsu. They need to learn a triangle choke known as sankaku. They need to learn straight armbar known as jujigatame. They need to learn a guillotine choke. They need to learn the kimura arm lock, and what was the 5th thing they sorry, I'm blanking. Oh, and the rear naked choke, right? So every striker thinks, oh, it's just, if I learn those 5 subs, I'm good. It's like, no. How are you going to get to those 5 subs? You need to learn how to get in position on the ground to get those 5 submissions. That's a whole different universe than punching, and then what? Someone just throws himself on the ground for you? It's not going to happen that way. You've got to figure out how to get from your feet, from the punches, to the ground. That's a whole different world. Whether it's wrestling or judo or sambo, there's technique involved in getting somebody to the ground. Now that you're on the ground, you've got to get in position to apply those 5 submissions that you think that's all you need to learn. So I give huge props to Holly for taking on the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling, because it's a whole different universe than the kickboxing. But at least Holly had all 8 striking weapons, right? Hands, elbows, knees, feet. I'll presume that she learned from kickboxing, whereas Claressa has 2 out of the 8 striking weapons and 0 of the grappling and jiu-jitsu weapons as she tries to make her way in the cage. So, bottom line, I put Christy Martin and Holly Holm well ahead of Claressa in terms of accomplishment, and certainly in terms of contribution to women's combat sport overall. Christy Martin has continued to be a leader in the sport of women's boxing. She participates in female amateur events, so she's an inspiration to young girls and young aspiring female amateur boxers, as well as to professionals who are still fighting. And Holly has, of course, become part of sort of mainstream awareness or mainstream consciousness about as a female MMA fighter. So those of you who know Holly only as a UFC fighter, I encourage you to take a look back at her boxing career. So tell me your thoughts. Who do you consider some of the best female fighters of all time? Please share in the comments below. Thank you.